Now, I tend to be more quantitative, just that's the way I'm wired. And one of the things that I'm seeing, and I've learned through the years, is that the qualitative side, the so-called soft skills, or as Audrey calls them, power skills, honestly, I think they're, I'm not going to say, I'll say it, more important than a lot of the quantitative and statistical skills.
Hi, Michelle Florendo here, and welcome to Ask a Decision Engineer. Listen in and find out how to untangle big decisions with less stress and more clarity. In our last episode, we explored the technical applications of decision analysis, how the frameworks and tools are used in industries like oil and gas, to healthcare, to consumer products. But there's another side to this field that's equally important, the human side. The skills that help people work together better, communicate more clearly, and navigate the messy realities of making decisions as humans, not robots, whether you're deciding alone or with others. This season was made possible in partnership with the Society of Decision Professionals. We'll start with Tony Kenck from the last episode, referencing what his colleague Audrey often calls power skills. And he believes these are actually more valuable than the technical expertise. Is there anything else you would want to share with people who are just learning about this space or this organization?
Yeah, so outside of portfolio, this organization's about making better decisions generally. It can be in business, but it can also be in your personal life. It's about giving some thought. It's almost like a little bit of a checklist. Just before you make a really important decision, make sure you've thought about some of the key elements of it. So it's useful not just in business, but in personal life. Now, I tend to be more quantitative, just that's the way I'm wired. And one of the things that I'm seeing, and I've learned through the years, is that the qualitative side, the so-called soft skills, or as Audrey calls them, power skills, I think they're, I'm not going to say, I'll say it, more important than a lot of the quantitative and statistical skills. I like the numbers and the models and all that. And at the same time, if you look at the SDP framework for decision quality, 5 of the 6 elements are on the soft skills side, maybe 4 of the 6. Mm-hmm. And that just, it tells you something. This organization has always been focused on the quantitative side because that's really the roots
history
of decision analysis.
Yeah.
And I think there's a growing realization that those soft power skills are at least as important, if not more so.
You heard Tony explain how these decision skills can help us in both work and life. Now, I want to share something personal with you, because when we actually start using these approaches, something really interesting happens inside us. Andrew Thrift knows this feeling well. He's someone who, like many of us, my hand is raised, tends to want to get things just right. And here's what he discovered about letting go of that need for perfection. One of the things that I'm curious about, because obviously there are some applications, like you said, when there are huge, very, very complex decisions going on, and even smaller things. But when you think about, like, what are some of the other benefits of being equipped with these tools that you've seen?
One of the benefits that I've thought of for myself personally, and I've heard articulated back to me from different people, is I'm an optimizer and lean perfectionist by nature. So my tendency would be, I've got these options and I want to make the right choice, and do I need to get some more information? At times where you really say, they're all great, and I can just go and move forward. And as well, minimizing your regret of feeling afterwards, oh, I should have looked at that. So that distinction between a good decision process and good outcomes and the role of luck has been, for me, really freeing, in the sense of when I know I've met the criteria for decision quality and something bad happens, it's like nothing I could have done about it. And talking to even to our senior executives, that was one of the points where I had nodding heads of like, you know, when you've done this, it's good enough, you can defend it, and the chips will fall where they fall, and it also helps you think about what might go wrong so you're ready to pick up the ball if it drops. But just that peace of mind where it's good enough, we can move on and not worry about should I have done something different.
So really developing a confidence around decision making, and even I imagine it would save you time because you know when you've done enough and you can move on to the many other decisions that you probably have to make.
Yeah, exactly. It gives a way to say, time to put a pin in it, make a decision, and I've counted the cost of not doing more, and I'm comfortable with it, and I can live with it.
Yeah. You know, one of the things that I was hearing as I was sitting in various sessions at this conference is how, like, the impact of having a structured process on who gets to speak in the room and like who gets to weigh in. And so curious what you've seen there have been the benefits.
One of the things that I found helpful is to tell people, there's a lot of biases, and I think there's pretty good awareness of, Kahneman's work and thinking fast, and so people at least know they should know something about biases, and so it pricks their ears. But then you say the process here is designed to mitigate. So you may not see. It's kind of like the analogy of if you wash your hands, you're going to be healthier, and you don't know which germs are coming off each time you wash. And so one of those things is that the design of these processes, where you facilitate them, is inclusive and empowering to people and voices that may not be heard. So part of it is thinking broadly about what do we care about. It's not just the traditional economic metrics in a for-profit organization. It's also about the social, environmental, reputational things. So who are the people who know that well, who need to be in the room? We talk a lot about the value of diversity and creating a space for creative thinking, and saying part of that is creating space and holding space for creativity. Part of it is actually having diverse voices, diversity, all its forms, discipline, gender, race, gender orientation. And so not only are there, but empowered to speak. And so one of the ways, in a concrete example, is I typically, if I'm facilitating in a room, I'll say everyone 10 minutes, writing down sticky notes in person or in a virtual whiteboard. Then I'm going to come around the room and I'm going to ask each of you for one idea, and we want to hear from you because you're here because you know something no one else in the room does, and you're going to have if you're new here, you're going to ask questions that we may not have thought of. If you're being around for a long time, you may have some deep knowledge the room needs to hear. So I try to set expectations around everyone has something to contribute, and that diversity is a key thing to seeing risks, seeing a rounded view of the picture. Yeah. So that's been one aspect of
so it's not even
synergistic.
So it's not even just who's in the room, but also making sure they have a voice.
Yeah, absolutely. I think sometimes we feel like we can tick the box if those people are physically present, but unless there's very clear overt signals that you're going to challenge or set aside traditional power dynamics.
Or that hippo thing.
Yeah, highest paid person in the room, and you hear stories about Obama, right, going last in a conversation, and so it's partly the habits of the leaders choosing to, I'm going to speak last, or like I'm going to hold, and then the behaviors around valuing, thank you for bringing that challenging feedback, asking for that, creating a norm of conflict being fuel. So there's lots of things that can help make it a bit safer, but I think part of that is for those people who don't feel safe. Sometimes it's saying,
I'm a massive introvert.
Yeah.
Some of these processes, like, I'm thankful for.
Yeah, and it's creating space for you to think and then have a chance. But also sometimes it's a conversation in the coffee break saying, I'm going to ask you, and it's maybe but you have really important stuff to say, and I want you to hear it, and I want the other people to hear it, and I'm going to support you, and I may call you out. Be ready. So it's a bit of seeing what it takes for the audience in the room, and making sure that those people feel like they're valued, and it's an expectation they're going to give their voice.
Andrew described that wonderful sense of relief when you know you've done enough, when you can move forward with confidence. But there's another shift that happens as you learn about decision science, and it's quite profound. Walter Kosi put it perfectly when he talked about becoming sensitive to something he'd never really noticed before. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. What are some of the things that you've found most eye-opening or useful as you've been on this learning journey?
Good question. what comes to my mind immediately is that I got really, I'm looking for the English word. I got very sensitive to biases.
Oh.
Yeah, because decision quality, it's a lot about biases too. Yeah. And the more I do it, in my own company, the more I see how biases work, right? So it really jumps to my eye. So I got a little sensitized for that.
Right. It's like once you saw it, you couldn't unsee it.
Yes, exactly. That's it. That's exactly it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Walter's awakening to biases really resonates. It's like suddenly noticing something that was always there. But here's a question. If these insights are so valuable, how do we share them with others without making it feel overwhelming or academic? Audrey Del Vescovo has thought deeply about this, and her approach is both practical and kind.
Okay, so the first thing is if I'm talking to someone who is not attuned with structured decision making, what I try and do is just practice it with them in terms of I don't tell them, oh, I'm going to figure out what your objectives are now, and then I'm going to figure out, I just kind of have a conversation with them. And so people can go through it and actually get clarity at the end of it and not even know. This is especially so when I'm dealing with personal decision making, which I do a lot of now. They don't even know they're going through a structured process. So in a corporate sense, or when you're dealing with projects, you have to go through a structured process. And I try not to call it a structured process. I'm just going to say, we're going to just have a look at these things this way. Think of it as a mindset. Think of it as a roadmap of how we're going to tackle things. And I like to be very flexible. If something isn't working, I will change it. It's not a problem. And I'll let them know. And I ask them, the team, to say, if something isn't working for you, let me know. Because we can pivot, we can change, we want to make this valuable for you. That tends to take a lot of the stress out of the situation that we're doing something new, blah, blah, blah. However, if it's not new, like when I worked in my corporate job, it was not a new thing. So people understood the way it flowed. The problem with that is once people understand the way it flows, they may try to proceduralize it, if that's the right word, make it into a procedure, and have check the box stuff that happens, which kind of takes the whole flexible, iterative approach to our craft. It throws it out the door because now you've checked your brain out at the door and you're just checking boxes. So it's a really fine line. And this is a hard one for corporates who are trying to incorporate organisational DQ, because the tendency then is to try and make some boxes they can check off to make sure, have we done everything? And that is a risky road to go down.
I love how Audrey thinks about making these tools feel natural rather than rigid. But let's consider another challenge. What happens when people in the room have very different backgrounds and expertise? How do we make sure everyone's voice matters? Lee Failing faces this reality every day, working with groups where some people are technical experts and others are community members who care deeply about the outcome.
My name's Lee Failing, and I live on the North Shore, so I just got here by getting on a little boat and coming across the water.
Oh, okay. And can you tell me more about the work that you do?
Sure. I'm a decision analyst and a facilitator, and I work on decisions involving natural resources and the environment. And those decisions almost always involve multiple stakeholders who have really diverse values, and they're usually in some level of conflict. So I get them in a room together, and I help them work through a collaborative decision-making process.
Okay. And so tell me more about, how did you first learn about this stuff, like decision-making?
Oh, wow, that goes back so long, like 30 years ago, when I just first started working in natural resource management. And I was just really switched on by the idea that people need to be involved in the decisions that affect their lives, whether they're technically savvy or not, just people need to be involved in decision making. And so I realized that it was kind of a space where not that many people were operating. All our work is always siloed. We do technical analysis and ecosystem stuff and economics and all these different things, but there's nobody integrating them so that people could make sense of the whole thing and make informed choices.
And I imagine that, when you're a facilitator, the people in the room, not everyone has a technical background. So can you tell me more about how some of these tools have been useful?
Yeah, so I really focus on the upfront stages of decision making. We call it structuring the decision. And it means really being clear about what decision you're making, what's in and out of scope, but then really digging into the values underlying the decision. So what is it that's at stake that people really care about? And turning those into really clear objectives, and then generating a whole bunch of alternatives to address them. And that's all really separate from a lot of the really technical stuff that a lot of people talk about and think about when they think about decision science and decision analysis. And I'm not saying there's not value in that, but it's really critically important to get the upfront structuring piece right. And we work really hard to try to just peel away the levels of complexity and separate the really technical work that needs technical expertise from the value judgments, which is very different. And it's pretty close to my heart. People who don't have technical expertise still have a right to have a say in their decisions.
Yeah. And tell me more, you just served on a panel about decision education, and I know that you also bring this work to youth. Can you say more about what has been the impact of bringing some of these tools to young people?
Yeah, I've had the really good fortune to work with a really inspired group of teachers here in British Columbia, and they have learned a little bit about decision making and they're bringing it into their classrooms. And what they say they're seeing is that just changes in the kids' outlook. So the first is agency. When they have decision skills and they realize they can make their own choices in line with their own values, not just what their parents say or their friends are doing or what's in their social feed, then they really feel empowered. So that's one big change. Another one is they really have a framework for thinking through complex issues in society, so they can make informed and really thoughtful opinions about things rather than just a gut reaction. And the third thing that teachers are really switched on about is they say it's changing how kids interact together, even in the classroom. They're learning some skills for talking with people who are different from them, people they disagree with. And they're learning, wow, okay, we can disagree, but we can still work together and collaborate and come up with solutions we can all live with.
Lee's passion for including everyone in decisions that affect them is really moving. But here's something we need to be honest about. Even when we create these inclusive spaces, people don't always want to participate. And if they don't engage, we lose something important. Samantha Rush studies this exact challenge. And tell me more about your research and what is it that you do in this space?
So my research is all about the acceptability of techniques. So for those of us who work in the decision space, we use a lot of different kinds of tools and techniques. And when we're using those techniques and we're using them with other people, so where you've got group decision making that's happening, one of the biggest problems that we have is silence or groupthink. And so some of these techniques we know can be really helpful for helping with those things, but acceptability is a key concept that actually drives effectiveness. So if people don't want to participate in the process for whatever reason, and they don't want to share whatever their piece of the puzzle is, you're not going to get it. And that means that the quality of your decision and the outcomes are going to be impacted. So I'm researching what's the who, when, what, why and how that drives acceptability of whatever tools and techniques you're using so you can get better outcomes.
Samantha reminds us that good techniques aren't enough if people won't use them. Now, let's talk about perhaps the most challenging scenario of all, when you have multiple groups with completely different values trying to make decisions together. It might seem impossible, but Reidar Bratvold has a thoughtful perspective on how we can navigate these complex situations. What are some of the benefits of thinking this way, even in groups and when there are other parties involved?
Yes. Yeah, so in many situations, almost all situations, you have multiple stakeholders, right? And you need to deal with that in a meaningful way. And again, I think this methodology helps us do that. How do we come to alignment if we got multiple stakeholders and multiple decision makers? In a corporation, there are often multiple stakeholders, but there is a single decision maker or a team of decision makers. So then there's a distinction between being a stakeholder and a decision maker.
Right.
So I am, maybe in my decision making, I'm concerned about other people, but at the end of the day, I'm the one who's making the decision. Right? In other situations, there are really multiple decision makers. So many of these public policy type decisions are really, you got multiple stakeholders, different political parties, having very different value system. How do you get alignment around these people? And then it's not down to analytics, of course, then it's about facilitation and conversations and things like that. Yeah. And one should never critique, so this also applies to stakeholders. People have different value systems. And they should be allowed to have different value systems.
Can you go back to people have different value systems?
Yeah, stakeholders have different value systems. And I can say, I don't agree with your value system, but I should never say you're wrong. Your value system is a bad one. Right? Because that's what we can choose, right? But I can say, given your value system and your alternatives, I don't think you're making the optimal choice. Because given your value system and your alternatives and your beliefs, there's kind of like one way to get to a decision that's consistent with those values, that actually give you the most of what you want. Yeah. But we should never. I don't think we should. I'm concerned about politics, not at least in the U.S., where people are criticizing value systems, and I don't think that's a good thing. No. Yeah. We can talk about whether we like them or not, right? But people, countries, cultures choose their own value systems. Yeah.
Okay. What strikes me most about these conversations is how decision analysis isn't really about complex formulas or technical expertise. It's about thinking more clearly and including more voices. Whether it's Andrew finding peace of mind, Walter seeing the biases that he now can't unsee, or Lee empowering people without technical backgrounds, these stories show us that good decision-making is fundamentally human. The tools and frameworks matter, but what matters more is the mindset, being thoughtful about what we value, curious about different perspectives, and humble about what we don't know. These aren't just professional skills, they're life skills that can help all of us navigate an uncertain world with more confidence and compassion. In the next episode, I'm going to explore a question that came up again and again in my interviews. If these decision skills are so valuable, who else could benefit from learning them? And why aren't we teaching this more widely? Stay tuned, and I'll see you next time. Thank you so much for listening to the show. If you know of someone who might benefit from learning more about how to make good decisions, please send them a link to our website, poweredbydecisions.com/podcast. The website poweredbydecisions.com is also the place to go if you are interested in more resources on decision making or would like to submit a question to potentially be answered on a future episode. Again, this is Michelle Florendo from Ask a Decision Engineer. Thank you so much for listening, and I'll see you on the next episode.